Welcome everybody. So yesterday Nick and I talked a bit about consciousness and the complexities of that and how could we replicate that and put it into an AI. And so please all give a warm welcome to Nick and see what he's got today.
So as you can see, I now have to use the laptop in this talk because I was so stimulated by last night's panel that I couldn't immediately go to sleep. So I put in some thoughts in response to the panel last night, which in a sense continues further what we did yesterday in terms of consciousness and what really is consciousness. So in this way, we're also advancing the theme itself, but at the same time, we are also, in a sense, addressing some of the burning questions that have surfaced last night. So I'd just like to start basically with a picture of natural evolution. That is the kind of common mainstream. So from the Big Bang, right? There are many incidents there which I will cover tomorrow. But I'll just go immediately to planet Earth. Planet Earth was created out of the Big Bang. And then out of that, so basically the stars are furnaces for inorganic materials, like the heavier weight atoms, for example, which are the basis of life. So our star is a third generation star, in the sense that first there was a star, and then it explodes, right? And then it gets reattracted again by gravity, and then it burns up the fuel, and then it explodes again, and so on, right? So it's a third. And because of the third, it has heavier atomic particles or complex material, right? So anyway, that's the perspective. And so planet Earth was born out of that swirling mass till finally solidified and inorganic matter was there. Now, contemporary science has, in a sense, aside from all the other unexplainable aspects of the universe, which I will touch on tomorrow, it has discovered that what is thought was life. Okay, first you have inorganic life, right? Then life emerges. So, and then after that, kindly note the sequence. Life emerges, and then out of that somehow consciousness emerges, and then somehow self-reflective consciousness emerges. So all in conventional science, okay, basically mainstream science, all of those are not explainable. So the emergence of life from non-life is a huge mystery in conventional science. The emergence of consciousness from life is also, there's no seeming explanation. I'm going to go into this in detail. And then the emergence of reflective consciousness from consciousness is also a huge mystery. And I just want to bring that in because there are a number of contradictions in belief systems that are really more of a belief rather than well thought out stuff, right, given the existing science. So I'd just like to go over that. The first belief is that we are complex biological machines. Okay, so I would say that is a belief because as we shall see in part 2 this morning, that you have to overcome tremendous amounts of improbabilities to actually say that life came from non-life. So that is a huge improbability, And I'll just, to just give you an example, just give a quote from Francis Crick, right? You know Francis Crick, of course, Nobel Prize winner and discoverer of the DNA, co-discoverer, Crick and Watson, and so on. But before that, I'd like to get a quote from Fred Hoyle. I think he's a very famous scientist during his time. And he said, okay, this is just a sample of many such quotes, and you'll get a little more of that in the second half of the morning. And he said, Fred Hoyle compared the probability of life arising by chance to lining up 10 to the 50 blind people, okay, they're blind, all giving them scrambled Rubik cubes, and they're all figuring it out at the same time. Okay, that's the probability of life. So in other words, it's highly improbable. We'll get to see the exact figures because that's 1 followed by what? 50 zeros, right? In other words, you can figure it out. It's not due to chance, okay? Which is the tenet of natural evolution. Everything in this whole universe, all the forms, came from chance. Okay. So now, what did Francis Crick? What was his hypothesis? Okay. So Francis Crick, recognizing that these things cannot happen by chance. So what was his alternative hypothesis? So it's very interesting because his alternative hypothesis is directed panspermia. That's the technical term. In other words, life came from outer space, introduced from outer space. It cannot be developed here. So he actually basically throws away the question of life into another planet. And somehow it got directed here. And one scientist commented, I'll quote it, when a scientist of Crick's caliber, I mean, he's very knowledgeable, feels he has to invoke an undetectable spaceman, it is time to consider whether the field of pre-biological evolution has come to a dead end. So, in other words, if the top people in the field on the origins of life, because, the DNA cannot do it, as we shall see. DNA is not the molecule of life, as is the contemporary belief. And I'll show you why, what are the tremendous problems facing it in the second part this morning. But if the a top scientist like Crick believes more that there is that life came from another planet and was seeded here on Earth, so that shows you the state of where trying to create life in the laboratory is at the moment. No one has succeeded in creating life in the laboratory. So, given that, to say that we're complex biological machines is more of a belief system. Because the assumption there is that it has been scientifically proven that life came from inorganic matter, non-living matter. But that is a belief. There's no scientific proof. So that's the reason why, okay, this is very common. This opinion is very common. I can remember a quote from New York Times in 1987 or 1989. Big debate on patenting of life. And this is where I said, oh my gosh, a scientific belief system has become the mainstream belief of society. The New York Times is writing an editorial about a pending Supreme Court decision. It was trying to influence a Supreme Court decision in the United States, whether you can patent life or not. And the New York Times editorial said this. I can remember it very vividly. I can almost quote it word for word, almost, because it had such an impact on me. It said, the human being is complex and mysterious. But in the end, the human being is a complex biological machine that can be altered, cloned, and patented. So you can see, obviously, until today, there's no basis for that statement. Okay? Because the belief there, but by the way, that shows you the implications that if you believe you're a biological machine, then I tell this to my activist friends who also think like that. And we're good friends. And I tell them, okay, look at this New York Times editorial. We're nothing but complex biological machines. So you're fighting for human rights. So where would that come from? Because if you follow the logic, as New York Times did, the human being is complex and mysterious, but you can alter, clone, and patent the human being. And sure enough, that opinion entered the agreement on TRIPS in the WTO. The TRIPS is a special agreement, side agreement in the WTO, trade-related intellectual property. In an Article 27, I remember this very clearly because we had a lot of debate in this at the UN and other places, so I cannot forget the quote. They said you can actually patent human embryo. Why? And the reason was that because the embryo is microscopic in size. So if you can patent microbes, you can patent the human embryo. I mean, it's like the legalese. So that's why a friend of mine was so frustrated with this. He's a very famous lawyer in Washington, D.C. And we worked on this issue together when I was still stuck in Washington, D.C. I'm saying stuck because we were opposing the Bataan nuclear plant. So I couldn't go home. I was in the blacklist. So this friend of mine said, okay, I'm trying to recall his two jokes. He's a lawyer. So there are a lot of lawyer jokes in Washington, D.C., right? Because the concentration of lawyers in Washington, D.C. is 1:20,000. So it's the highest concentration of lawyers in the world. There are over at that time, 5,000 lobby groups. There were a lot of lawyers crawling in a city of about 1 million people. So 1 out of 20 is a lawyer lobbying for something, right? So okay, so he had two lawyer jokes, which I'm gonna share here to make this a little lighter. He said, what is the difference between a human being and a sperm? And what is the difference between a human being and a sperm? Huh? No?
That would be funny, though.
What?
Size?
No? What is the difference between a human being and a sperm?
The sperm needs the egg as well.
I beg your pardon?
The sperm needs the egg as well, whereas a human being is a combination.
Oh, no, it's too technical. No. Yeah, Michael.
Sperm knows its purpose.
We're getting close. The sperm has its purpose. We're getting close, Michael. It's along that line. The sperm has its purpose, right? But it's like this. He said that at least the sperm has a 1 in 1 million chance of becoming human. Okay. Because if you understand Washington, D.C. politics, I mean, there's all kinds of revolving doors. The whole TRIPS agreement in WTO was written by biotech companies. And the U.S. sort of forced this opinion, basically. So you have an agreement written by the biotech industry. So that's why this guy was so, I mean, he knows this, he's been following this, he's active in it. He wrote the book, Human Body Shop. Human Body Shop. It's a fantastic book. His name is Andrew Kimbrell. Kimbrell. maybe double L. He's now the head of, in California and Washington, D.C., of the Center for International Technology Assessment. So anyway, he's a very famous lawyer in the United States because he stopped a lot of genetic engineering projects. He's very, very good. So anyway, the other joke is, okay, the other joke is there's a lawyer. It's a good thing it's coming from a lawyer, right? So I hope there are no lawyers here. Okay, so there's a lawyer and a skunk. You're familiar with a skunk? Okay, there's a lawyer and a skunk crossing down the street, right? And then all of a sudden there's a speeding car, right? There's a speeding car. They didn't see it. They were crossing. And then what then is the difference between the lawyer and the skunk in that incident?
The skunk looks like a crossing, so the lawyer gets hit.
Almost, but because he said that at least there were skid marks before the skunk. There were no skid marks. This person wanted to run over the lawyer, and the skunk, at least they made the break, right? So this is how frustrating it is for, these are lawyers' jokes. They tell these jokes all the time among themselves. And it's because, in a sense, Washington, D.C. is run by lawyers, literally. And of course, behind the lawyers are big money, big lobbying groups, PACs, right? Super PACs. This is coming out now in the election in the U.S. So anyway, that's one aspect of the situation about. The second aspect is that there's a tremendous paradox that is unresolved in modern consciousness studies, including brain research and psychology and so on. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. Now, if you think about the hard problem is how does something inorganic produce something non-organic? Because none of you will say that your thought is physical. Is anybody here saying that thought is physical? None. Oh, there's one. Okay. Yeah. I don't see a, yeah?
I think maybe.
Yeah, physical. Yeah, I don't, okay, if thought is physical, you should be able to see thought eating breakfast with you. Right? Eating breakfast with you. Yes, Seth?
I can't see electricity eating breakfast with me either.
I beg your pardon?
I can't see electricity eating breakfast with me either.
Right. Force fields, right? But force fields and thought are very different things. Yeah. So, so in a sense, okay. The reason for that is that brain scientists can scan all they want about your brain, but it doesn't. They don't have access to what you're thinking. Okay, it's a very simple scientific fact. Neuroscientists have been trying to do that. They've not been able to really do that. Besides, it's the problem of memory, right, that we saw yesterday. That's why I was kind of bringing that thing up. And besides, if thinking is non-physical, okay, I had an experience. Okay, I'll just share an experience. I was in my 20s. My brother's a medical doctor, so he happened to know the chief neurologist of one of the largest hospitals in the Philippines. And at that time, the EEG machine, which measures brain waves, electrical impulses in the brain, was still clunky, right, unlike today. So we decided to do an experiment because I was disagreeing with this medical doctor that you can train your consciousness to emit certain types of electrical impulses. So I said, okay, let's test it. I have the EEG. in the hospital, because you know the beta, alpha, theta, and so on, right? The brain waves of the human being, different levels of frequencies, electrical impulses. And so then basically, so he hooked me up with all the wires. At that time, oh my God, all kinds of wires. Like you see, there are like probably several dozen wires in my head. At that time, it was primitive. Now you can get an EEG with one wire. Okay, so now, so I was there hooked up, and then he was examining my EEG, and then I couldn't forget what he said, because in creativity studies or previous brain studies, the state of theta is a kind of state where your brain waves slow down, and then you start accessing other aspects of consciousness. And so I slowed down my brainwave to theta. And then he was measuring it. Then he said, you know, if I didn't know you, I think you're schizophrenic. Because at that time, schizophrenia was connected with those kinds of brain states. So, okay, so we're speaking up a certain signal, which in contemporary psychiatry would be you're schizophrenic or some other mental disease. But I was totally lucid and in self-control and normal. So the machine couldn't pick up my thoughts. Okay, so I just wanted to say that as my own experience, that no matter how brain scientists would study your brain, scan it, they cannot find thought. Okay, they may find electrical impulses, but not thought. Those are two different things, as has been shown by this example. Okay, so if that is the case, then we have Gödel's problem, right? Remember Gödel that we described yesterday? So one is non-physical, the other is physical, right? So if the brain is physical, how can something non-physical arise with it? Because according to Gödel, it cannot happen. The system, and if basically material processes are determined, then you're totally unfree, right? There's no sense of saying I'm free, then you're totally unfree. Freedom only comes from the non-physical aspect of our thinking processes. Because all inorganic processes are determined and there's no free will. Yeah, that was already the highlight of 19th century science, when in a sense, the human being got lost in the revolution of scientific discoveries in the 19th century and carried on to the 20th century. So that is a kind of contradiction. Now, this hard problem of consciousness is very much, that's the name they call it. David Chalmers coined it in the 1990s. And I think the book was The Conscious Brain. So it's still, the hard problem still exists. Some of the AI scientists acknowledge the hard problem, but others just ignore it. There's no hard problem, because basically thinking is just physical as the brain. So there's no hard problem. There's no translation problem. How something inorganic or material can become basically non-material. Yes?
So is that the consequence of the human race going very much into materialistic way of
thinking? What is the consequence? No matter how materialistic the human race is, or the human beings are, it will never solve the problem of that contradiction, because the very first thing that you use to say materialism is that using your thinking to say materialism.
But
So you're using something non-material to make a proclamation that everything's material.
But they
Yeah.
always only look in the material side of things.
Yeah, that's the consequence.
So that's the consequence.
It's a contradiction.
I think immaterial part of ourselves.
Yeah, the moment people deny, I mean, that's why scientists would call it a hard problem, because they don't understand. And this is the mainstream view, right? It's not my view. I'm just citing here.
But that's the dominating one.
Yeah, no, the hard problem, yes.
Yeah.
But materialism in science, by the way, is also declining in the United States. I'll tell you why. Okay? Among scientists, anyway, who understand what's going on, or their access to certain kinds of discoveries. But the key point is that the contradiction is when you say everything is matter, you use your thought to say that, but your thought is non-matter. It's a tremendous contradiction. And that's why people have acknowledged the hard problem of consciousness. So once that problem is solved, we don't know when, then it becomes clear what AI will be, right? Because as we were showing yesterday, if consciousness is not just in the brain, but also outside, then that's indicating something about the AI. Okay. So yeah. There is okay. The other big thing about this, the other implication, if you think we're just biological machines, is a huge contradiction, because why worry about AI safety? There's no basis for worrying about AI safety, right? We're machines anyway, and we are creating more sophisticated machines that are super intelligent. So what's the big worry? Yeah? So why are all these scientists who are in AI, about 10,000 of them already signed a petition all over the world, the Declaration on Safety, many of them prominent in as I showed you the other night. So why should they be concerned? There's no basis. Yeah.
Because even if we're machines, we're like programmed to be concerned with our own perpetuation and survival.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that's just the program of one species in natural evolution. Now that species will be transcended and included in the next phase, and so that species will be surviving in the next phase, right? There's no worry. If you really believe, you should just sleep soundly at night, and then wake up in, it's technological miracle. Yeah.
Yeah, because we have a choice to do good or to do not good. And
Right.
if they are super intelligent, then they have a greater choice than we do about how much good they
Right.
can do and how much damage
Yeah.
they can do.
That kind of thinking can only come if we accept that we have freedom and we are not biological machines, which apparently, currently, the scientific evidence is showing, tending to that direction. That's why, as I said in the very beginning, I'm bringing in all kinds of other scientific findings in the conversation, because science itself has a dream of having wholeness, right? Now, if you're just AI specialists, which is fantastic, and we don't see what's going on in the other disciplines, we might get tunnel vision. What are the other scientists talking about? Scientists who are really prominent, right? Who are experts in their own field. What are they saying about specific aspects of reality? And then we try to bring this together into a kind of picture. and see how they all work out. Yeah. So that's the, that ultimately there's no need to actually really worry about AI safety. Michael?
I think that's a very provocative question, and I'm sure everyone here would want to talk about it, but I presume you want to keep going.
Okay.
I don't know.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah. In fact, that's how some of these natural scientists think. Yeah. So what's all the fuss about this? Yeah, please.
Could it be that also because they think this way, they also believe that we, this human species, and then particular streams, so for instance, maybe I'm making an assumption that these scientists are mostly Western thinking scientific streams. So is it about keeping power? Is it about believing that we are the superior machines?
That's part of it, but there are many motives among scientists who are wanting super AI. Some are economical, some are political, some are just basically, this is the logic of their belief system. This is where their belief system is heading to. So it's an honest opinion. As long as they believe that way, the only problem is that they have billions of dollars that are developing this thinking into reality, right? A kind of reality. Yes?
Yeah, I guess it's probably a rhetorical question because we don't have time for everyone to answer it. But I guess for me, why AI safety is important is because the world's already a very scared and violent place.
Right.
And for me, I think throwing AI into the mix is like this continuing addiction of distraction. Like,
right.
Okay, this will solve it now.
Right.
As opposed to just sitting down and thinking, no, it won't. Let's deal with what we have right now.
Mm-hmm.
But under the belief system, there would be no freedom, therefore it would be completely determined.
Yeah.
If that's the belief system, so you
Yeah.
wouldn't have anything to worry about. They couldn't make choices.
Right.
Because they
Yeah.
wouldn't have the freedom to do that. Under that belief structure.
Yeah, exactly. There's no freedom there.
Ultimately, there's no big deal if
Yeah.
being ceases to exist.
Absolutely. There's no big deal.
It's all
That's
determined,
how it
and we determine it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's only us who think that.
Yeah.
Sorry, they know that we have consciousness, yes?
Who knows?
Scientists.
Scientists?
Conventional scientists.
Yeah. But some of them say that that is just a product of your brain. That's the whole point. That's why I started. We are complex biological machines. Are we not or not? Yeah. So that's the consistency of the thought. If you carry it out, there's really nothing to worry about if in the game of chance you're wiped out. It doesn't really matter in the end. I just want to make it like that, right? And then those that survive, the next stage, becoming incorporated in super intelligent machines, the melding of the machines. Then they'll exist for a while. Hopefully, they hope to attain immortality.
They're making the assumption that they're in the highest form of intelligence or consciousness. That's what they're saying to these machines, AI. How can they prove that? How can they prove that?
No, this is the reason why.
More conscious or vastly more
just okay.
intelligent than even what an AI can produce.
Yeah, that's why you will notice I introduced the notion of natural evolution. This is the language of the AI scientists. There's natural evolution from the Big Bang, inorganic, organic, consciousness, and so on. Everything comes from matter, right? Yeah. So that's why the human species, no matter how beautiful, complex, and mysterious, is nothing but a machine. So the next evolutionary stage is a more complicated machine that will incorporate some of these human qualities and then move on. So that's where we're going, if we believe in that paradigm. But it says a lot. That's why I brought up the Panama example, because some of the people making this AI are actually of that belief system. But they actually signed the Declaration on AI Safety. So there's a kind of, because in the end, there's no notion of human responsibility. where will it come from? It's all determined. It's just like chance.
But someone like Peter Singer, the ethical altruism,
Right.
it's all calculated and protocoled and
Right.
not spiritual, it's atheist-based.
Right.
There's that.
Right.
Because it makes it sound like people who accept that way don't care, but they do. They just have a different understanding
Okay.
of that ethical altruism is somehow in our program, or
Right.
it matters the experience of being superseded.
Mm-hmm.
Like it matters how that feels.
It's all an illusion. I mean, if you take the paradigm. Because if it's in our program, if you take natural evolution, it's in our genes, and Darwinian evolution is saying competition, right? The most fit will survive. It doesn't really matter in the end, because there's no meaning to this universe.
I mean, Peter Singer, I mean, I'm not on his side, incidentally. I don't agree with him, because I think morality and ethics are very different. But I'm just trying to put that forward, that there, within that whole system, there's a way of saying it matters what the experience of the machine is, because we're an experiencing machine. We're not just a non-experiencing machine.
It
And how
doesn't.
much suffering there is when you're superseded.
Yeah,
matters.
right. Yeah, but in the end, you're a machine.
But I feel it.
Yeah, so
So what they're saying is evolution exists, but it doesn't exist?
no, yeah, there are other higher stages, right? But what is the point if you're basically ultimately inorganic matter? There are no emergences of higher faculties or possibilities, right? Everything is dead matter. So in a sense, where does human rights come from? I mean, which is connected with that. Because at core, there's a UN Declaration of Human Rights. If you do that, in a sense, that is the core default framework of the human civilization. There is actually there a tacit belief that there's something much greater, more sacred in us, and more profound than just being biological machines. Given that that Declaration of Universal Human Rights was earlier into the, not in the 21st century, no nation has dared to amend that declaration, which is becoming the foundation of the human rights policies of nations around the world, and the basis for some of this ethical stuff. What I'm saying is that if you're just really consistent on a materialistic worldview, there's no problem with AI. This is all I'm saying. No real problem with it. Machines are determined. So who the hell cares what happens to them? One way or the other? Yeah? It doesn't mean anything. Molecular structures bump into each other, and by chance something happens, and so on. Yeah, Michael?
Why can't we be biological machines, let's say like Steph was saying, where we know 0.1% of ourselves?
I beg your pardon?
Where we know 0.1% of ourselves, and mostly we don't know, why can't we care?
Yeah, because, Michael, we've exhausted basically most aspects of material science, and there's a lot of still mysteries ongoing. So basically, we're transferring those understood things into the machine, into the matter. That's what's happening. Non-physical stuff, which is a lot of those mysteries, you just basically displace, instead of looking directly at the nature of consciousness and trying to figure out that mystery, which is valid in itself. We're always trying to displace it into the machine. Yeah.
It's a disconnect between the two concepts. We don't see it.
Please, Martin.
I think this something might have something to do with a perceived objectivity.
Yeah.
That you must remove yourself from the equation to be objective, because it's impossible for us to be objective if this is the idea.
Right.
And I wonder if,
Okay.
well, for me, I think I can be objective without removing myself from the planet. And I can actually say a human being is important and not think it's just because I'm a human being, I'm just being too subjective in saying it. I think I can be objective and say that looking at all the evidence, I think human beings are important, even though I am a human being. But I think a lot of scientists will say that's impossible because to be objective, you have to remove yourself from the equation.
Okay, that's a very old notion of, I think, outdated concept of science, which is part of the beginning of science. First Descartes, right, was the famous guy, right? He wanted to make sure that we focus on the material world, which you can quantify, which you can measure, you can weigh, and so on, right? You know Descartes, René Descartes, the philosopher? I think, therefore I am. Right, so therefore, he separated what ultimately in Galileo's hands became primary qualities, secondary qualities. So all, basically, things that relate to love, to feelings are all subjective, they're not subject to scientific stuff, right? They're the subject. And those that are primary, you can subject them to quantity, measurement, cutting up, and so on. But that's the methodology of what has died, or is there.
Isn't it still actually like a foundation just simmering below the surface?
No, because what's happening now is that psychology at least has gotten out of that stranglehold. Because the joke was, for a while, psychology was the study of the soul without a soul.
Soul without a soul.
The study of the soul without a soul. I mean, everything was, either reflexes, instincts, and that's what I'm saying. And Freud, although he introduced he took some ideas of the unconscious, subconscious, wanted to actually put this whole thing in a molecular basis. Freudian ideas. Okay. So that is the situation. So right now it's possible to be objective as far as inner states are concerned. And that's the foundation not only of psychology, but also what's emerging as spiritual psychology. You're familiar with Maslow? Abraham Maslow, very famous. Abraham Maslow. He's considered the father of the third force in psychology. So the first force was the Freudian. Human beings are nothing but sex, sublimation of sex and death instinct. That's the human being. Okay. Then Skinner came, behavioralism. So if you hear a lot, especially in government, carrot stick approach, that's Skinner. He wrote a book called Beyond Freedom and Dignity. I mean, it says it all. Beyond freedom and dignity. If you want to develop certain kinds of behavior in society, condition these people, your children, from the very beginning. And Skinner actually put his female child into a cage. And started doing operant conditioning on his child. And ultimately, I think either him or Skinner or the child committed suicide. So that's the second force. So Skinnerian psychology. Okay. I'm not saying there's no truth to Freud. I'm not saying there's no truth to Skinner. These are parts of the truth that have been blown up to become the only truth. Okay, then Maslow comes along. The third force, humanistic psychology. And you're all familiar with these 5 levels of hierarchy of needs, motivation, self-awareness.
And then it's very interesting, towards the end of his life, Maslow, and together with some colleagues, started speaking, introducing the notion of transpersonal psychology. Transpersona. In Latin, persona, personality, persona means mask. It's not the real self. So, transpersonal is actually pointing to a higher level of self in ourself, not just a personal self. And the personal self is mostly determined. How does that work? Just imagine, this study was done in the US. By the time the child is 5 years old, that child has received 10,000 commands, injunctions of do this or don't do that. Otherwise, you know what I'm saying? Out these aspects until finally they found out that there's another level. If that was all there was in the human being, there would be no change in the human being. It would just simply be a product of the past. We'd simply just be continuing the past. Whatever thoughts we've learned and so on. But the fact of the matter is that we can start thinking for ourselves. So where does the thinking power that totally changes the past in us, allowing us to create new futures, to innovate? If something is conditioned, already determined, how can something new enter? But it enters all the time in innovation. So this is where, in psychology, this is becoming a very big field, transpersonal, because now they finally recognize we have two selves at minimum. We have the personal self and the transpersonal self. Because our personal self is mostly determined. According also with as much as our biology, highly determined by instincts, passions, and so on. So it is, if you try to check in, and then the worst thing for a kind of nightmare for materialistic science basically was the discovery of Carl Jung of the collective unconscious. You're familiar with Carl? Somebody mentioned Carl Jung, right? Carl Jung, collective unconscious. This brings us back to the theme of where does consciousness reside, right? Because after examining, he was a scientist, scientist of the mind. He was a colleague of Freud, but had disagreements with Freud. He did not go with Freud's analysis that the human being was basically just a bundle of sexual and fear instincts, right? So he examined 69,000 dreams. Okay, so 69,000 dreams. He had many patients. He examined their dream life. And then he examined also, he started noticing something about this dream life, and he started also examining the myths of the other civilizations around the planet. And many of them had no connection with each other because we had no, of course, modern technology. And what he found out was that humanity has a collective unconscious. Freud discovered not Freud, but his teacher discovered the unconscious, which we thought was subjective. But there is a collective unconscious outside the boundaries of our personality that exists beyond space and time, but that influences us, and he calls this the archetypes. Yeah, and it's very interesting. Later, Jacob, because I only have 2 minutes left. I'll just finish the thought. Yeah, Carl Jung. So he's showing that consciousness is not basically just in. Okay, this is not a cult view, because when I was in the United States, the National Institutes of Health had a massive collection of all articles on Jung. National Institutes of Health is the Vatican of medical science. It is all the scientists concerned with medical health are there. So he became mainstream in the US after being fringe in the late 1980s. At the same time, Freud declined. Very few people are now, Freud discovered a certain aspect of the human being, but very few would believe that they're just merely walking sexual machines, right? With the fear of death. I say this because my brother was trained as a Freudian psychiatrist, and I had huge debates with him and was so happy that he finally got out of it. He was trained in the United States in the top school there for Freudian psychiatrists. He came home and we had this debate. I think my motives for my actions are more than my sex. But if you're nothing but biological machines, then, yeah, what would that mean? But we're not. So, on that note, I've been given the signal that's time. So we'll continue after the break.